Aside from your sewing machine and maybe a serger and some basic stuff like thread, what are some of the sewing room essentials? Well, I did a recent poll on my Facebook fan club and I got some really interesting answers, and I just felt like I had to share them with all of you. Hey everyone, I'm Sookie and welcome to the Beehive. So in no particular order, let's get started on the list of sewing room essentials. The first thing everybody mentioned was a good pair of fabric shears. And I have to say that I have had these Ginger fabric shears for at least 25 years. They were a treat to myself. I remember them being quite pricey at the time, but they had a leopard print, and at the time I was obsessed with leopard print. But having a good pair of fabric shears is definitely going to be a sewing room essential. Another one would be a pair of short, sharp scissors. These are part of the Sookie Sews cutlery line, and they are exactly that. They are short and sharp. In fact, the scissors themselves they're called the 5.5-inch all-purpose craft scissors, although I wouldn't really use these for crafting, but craft type fabrics. So like if I'm doing a lot of cutting with cork or felt or vinyl, anything that I need a lot of precision and control, but I don't want to have to cut with my fabric shears, I would do with my 5.5-inch craft scissors. The cool thing about these is they are just as sharp as my fabric shears, but they are shorter. So you can see what the difference of the cutting, the actual cutting blade itself is much different. And so for that reason, you're able to get in smaller areas with the 5.5-inch all-purpose craft scissors. The next thing that a lot of people mentioned were a good pair of tweezers, and I gotta brag on the Sookie Sews line again. These are the angled precision tweezers. They're kind of like, they look like there's like a little foot or a little ankle in a sock. That's what I always think when I look at these. But these are really good for pulling out threads out of your bobbin case. Or in fact, instead of a seam ripper, you could even get the little end of the tweezers underneath a thread. They're exactly named the right thing. They are angled precision tweezers. There's a lot of accuracy with these, and you can get into some small, kind of cramped spaces. I also use these a lot with my serger too, but this was definitely voted top for sewing room essentials. The next would be a pair of thread snips. Now these are still part of the Sookie Sews line. These are my favorite because for two reasons. One, I can pick them up quickly, and instead of like a pair of scissors where I have to put my fingers through the hole, I just close down, and that's what actually does the cutting. The other thing I like about these, the easy snips, is the hook. Do you see the hook right there? This allows me to get under threads, kind of like a seam ripper, and then clamp down and clip my threads. I use these for everything. I have a pair next to my serger, next to my sewing machine, and next to my embroidery machine. For sure, with embroidery, you're able to just pull the thread, like jump threads, with that little hook. So these are fantastic. And then probably one of the top rated items on the survey was a seam ripper. Now I did a video on this particular seam ripper years and years ago, so I'll have that link in the description along with links for some of these other items. But this is just a really great seam ripper. I think I read somewhere once that you should change your seam ripper out every 6 months to a year, kind of like as often as you go to the dentist. But I have to say, this particular seam ripper has lasted me, I'm probably gonna say going on 2 or 3 years. Maybe I've just gotten to be a better sewer, I don't know. But it's done a really good job for me. And the idea of this one is that you rip the seam, or whatever it is, your stitches out with the seam ripper. And then on the other tips is a little rubber nozzle, and you just kind of take the threads and it wipes the threads away after you have removed them with your seam ripper. So this is a really great seam ripper, and like I said, it's lasted me several years. The next category would be wood pressing tools. These came up a lot in the comments on my Facebook fan club about sewing room essentials. And the first one was a clapper. A lot of people use these for when they're doing garment making, but even quilting and even machine embroidery. The idea is that you stitch a seam, you press it with your steam iron, and then you lay this down over the seam, and the wood helps set your seam. Now these do come in different sizes. I've seen ones that have really pretty prints on them. These were actually gifted to me from Angela Wolf. You can go to her website to get these yourself, and they come in 2 different sizes. I think I probably tend to use the smaller one more just because I do more like in the hoop projects and smaller seams. But I suppose if I did a lot more garment making like pant legs or sleeves, I would probably use the larger one more so. The next is any kind of wood pressing tool, like the wood rollers. These are so cool. Now, this is one I've been using for quite some time, and I'll have the link in the description. But the idea with these is that after you sew your seam, to avoid having to go back and forth to a pressing table, you can just use the little rolling mat to just press your seam. And I have to say that recently I treated myself to this one because it has the pretty yellow handle, and this is custom made from somebody on Etsy. So I'll have the link in the description for this one so that you can check it out. They have all different colors, and they even have different types of notions on their Etsy shop. And the last is the By Annie stiletto and pressing tool. A stiletto is a really amazing thing. It's this little metal thing right here. Annie's is kind of almost like a nail file to the touch. It's very sharp, not sharp enough to hurt yourself really. I suppose you could, maybe in a dark parking lot. It might be nice to carry this, but the idea is that it's kind of like having a third finger. So a stiletto helps you move fabric along, and it helps you get your fabric really close to the needle without your finger getting close to the needle. And then on the other side of the stiletto is the pressing tool. It's on a perfect angle, so as you're pressing fabric, it does this a really quick press. I love having the stiletto and pressing tool from By Annie in my sewing studio. I have to say that was not just a mention of mine, that was something that a lot of my club members mentioned. The next section was irons and ironing boards, and I think I'm going to start with the Quilter's Cut and Press because for me personally, this is what I use most of the time, just simply because of how my sewing space is set up. I'm right off the living room and the kitchen. I'm actually in the dining room, so I don't have a place to keep an ironing board up permanently. I'll talk about my ironing system in just a minute, but this is what I use most of the time for my pressing surface. On one side, it's a pressing surface, and it's even got marked grids and everything. And then on the other side is a cutting mat. It does come with a handle too, and though I don't really use the cutting mat very often because I have other cutting mats that I prefer better, but it is nice to have that option. So if you're in a small sewing space and you don't have literally the space to put an ironing board up, this might be a good option for you. Let me show you the actual irons that I use kind of to coordinate with each of these sizes. We'll just go right into the Oliso ironing systems. I have the mini, which I love for smaller projects. It does get very hot, so I kind of keep it between temperature 2 and temperature 3, but in order to use the steam, you have to have it on temperature 3. So it does get kind of hot to the touch even here where, I mean, technically it shouldn't get hot, but I don't even care. I still love this little iron. It's great. And it does come with a silicone mat that you would put the iron on itself when it's in the sitting position. So the Oliso irons don't sit on their backside. They actually sit right on the sole plate. So this little silicone part doubles as a traveling device as well. So like or a storage device, I guess, and maybe a traveling device. So like if you are going to travel with your iron, you can put this on top of it and it'll protect it inside a small area. And then the other one that I use most of the time for my pressing is the Oliso Pro. And this is the kind of iron that has a lifting action. I have videos on both of these. I'll have the links in the description. But if I had to say one iron that I use the most in my studio, it would for sure be the Oliso Pro and also the Quilter's Cut and Press number 2. This is the system I use most of the time, just simply because of my workspace and how large it is.
Now, if space wasn't an object, I would absolutely have my Laura Star ironing system set up at all times. This is an amazing system. I mean, I'm not even going to go into too much detail because honestly, just go watch the video I created a couple of years ago on the Laura Star system. It's all one unit though. The ironing board, the water tank, the iron itself, it's all inclusive and it's easy to pull out of the closet and set up. And that's what I do if I'm going to sew for more than a couple of days. So check out my video on YouTube so you can learn more about it.
Another section of things that people mentioned quite often was a cutting mat and of course a table. But let's first talk about the cutting mat, kind of like the cutting mat, ruler, and the rotary cutter. For years, I have to say that Olfa has been my go-to cutting mat and rotary cutter along with their rulers. I just love their rulers. They're kind of like frosted on one side, making it easier to see through your material. And it of course has different angles and measurement markings. So I've always really loved this. It's still definitely a go-to cutting mat. The Olfa comes in many, many sizes. I'll have some links in the description so that you can see some videos that I've done on various items here. But I also want to show you my new favorite cutting mat system. The new cutting mat system is that it's an entire complete system. It has the cutting mat, which is two-sided and it's magnetized in the middle. And then the ruler, it also has magnets on it. And then there are booster magnets that go along with this. They have magnets on the bottom side of the plastic handle, and then they're able to just secure to the mat. I just did a whole in-depth complete video on this system if you want to learn more about it. But I gotta say, this has definitely been my go-to cutting mat now. It has helped with my wrist pain and just fatigue of cutting. The whole thing, it's quite impressive. If you get a chance to go see one of these at a local store, just ask for the So Tight, So Magnetic Mat system. It is really impressive. And then, of course, an essential for a sewing room is a table. And if you have the luxury of a dedicated sewing space, then I would highly recommend that you treat yourself to a Flexi Spot table. Speaking of Flexi Spot, they are the sponsor for this video. Right now, Flexi Spot has a Black Friday sale that is beginning today. If you use my code FlexiSpot30, you're going to get an extra $30 off on their E7, E7 Pro standing desk, and C7 ergonomic chair. You do not want to miss this chance. I love my Flexi Spot table. So just follow the link in the description and you will learn more about it. The next thing on the list was organization. This is essential for a sewing room. I have to admit that I have finally gotten myself nice and organized. You can go ahead and check out my studio tour from last year. Everything's pretty much the same, though I have changed a few things around. Where I keep my thread is completely out of the light, which is very important. I have lots of drawers, shelves. You can even see where I am able to store my fabric. It is in plain sight, but hidden in the living room. The next is lighting. And though I haven't treated myself to any new lighting in quite some time, my favorite daylight is still the Slimline. It has been tried and true. I have 3 of them in my sewing studio. I use 2 of them more in a dedicated space for filming, and then the other I keep over near my serger. But you can check out, this is an old video where you can see me demonstrating it, even putting it together. It is still my go-to light, and they've come out with different versions since then, so I'll have all the links in the description. A lot of folks mentioned kind of a basket of notions, and of course the obvious things are required for a sewing space, but some are really more essential, like a good tape measure, one that has inches and centimeters on the other side. It's pretty easy to find. I mean, I did a video on kind of 10 basic sewing notions that everybody should have, and some of these were in there as well. I for sure love flower head pins. These are my go-to pins. I like them because the head is large enough so that you can see it on your fabric. Even if you do work with a serger and you don't want to use pins traditionally with a serger, but if it's far enough away from the blade and the needle, then it's nice to be able to see a nice bright head flower pin. And of course, a magnetic pin cushion. And another thing that people mentioned throughout the comments on the Facebook group was Wonder Clips. Whoever invented these, I think Clover was the company that finally came out with them. And these are just handy little devices. They are basically, instead of using straight pins, it's got a little clip to it. It's spring loaded, and they're just really great for using in your sewing space. Another couple of things, just a marking pen. I do like the friction pen. It heats away. I have a whole video on different types of marking pens though, so I'll have that in the description. And another thing people mentioned in the Facebook fan club was a hem gauge or a seam gauge. This is something that I have to say that I do use quite often. It's got all kinds of different markings on it. It's easy to push up and down. I'll have a link in the description for this one here, but this is something that most garment makers kind of definitely an essential, but I feel like even just if you're making bags or small accessories or home decor, maybe even quilters would use this too. There's all kinds of different markings on this tool, and it is really handy. And the last section for sewing room essentials is kind of a random hodgepodge of items, but these were things that were mentioned in the Facebook fan club that I totally agreed with. And the first one was pliers. I have many pliers in my sewing room, actually. These are just two that I kind of like always have handy. I go to needle nose pliers and ones that are more of on an angle, but also kind of needle nose. I mean, I've had these things so long, I couldn't even tell you where I got them, but I use them all the time, so I thought that was a really good mention. Another was masking tape and painter's tape. For those of you that do a lot of machine embroidery, we do use painter's tape quite often. It's low adhesive, it's easy to tear off. A lot of people will use this to, as a seam guide on their sewing machine. There's so many uses for painter's tape in a sewing room that, this is mine. I've had it for a long time. You can tell it's gotten some use and love, and it has become an essential in my sewing room. And then the next one would be, probably I use this more than the painter's tape, and that would be just clear adhesive tape. I don't like the one that's shiny. I like the one that's more matte. In fact, actually, this one's kind of usually the cheaper of the two, but it's just a matte tape. I use it mostly for machine embroidery projects. I can't say that it's low adhesive, but it does exactly what it's supposed to. And the clear adhesive tape works a little bit better on the wrong side of an embroidery hoop than the painter's tape because it does have more of an adhesive and you can actually tape it to the hoop itself. So yeah, I use that a lot. Another one was something that was mentioned recently in another conversation about non-sewing sewing notions, and that would be a spatula. This thing has come in so handy. I'm really glad somebody suggested this a while back because now I use it myself quite a bit. I kind of treat it as a third hand when I'm sewing or if I'm in machine embroidery. Basically just kind of something to, help you move, but without putting your finger really close to the needle or the presser foot. So this has become kind of a cool little addition to my sewing studio. And I have to say it's kind of an essential now. It lives in my sewing space. And then the last, and this is not for everybody, but if you do machine embroidery, for sure you have a computer in your sewing space. It is an absolute essential. Whether you're a Mac or PC person, it doesn't really matter. Just having a computer and having access to it is really nice for when you're trying to get your designs onto your machine. But I also want to mention that even if you have an extra laptop in your house, use it to watch videos while you're sewing or to have your patterns. If you buy a lot of digital patterns, instead of printing them, just look at the PDF on your computer, save some paper. So I do have to say having a laptop in my sewing space is for sure a sewing room essential. Well, Sewing Bees, I really hope you enjoyed this video and you found some value in it. If you did, please consider sharing this with one of your sewing friends. The best way for my channel to grow is for you to share and spread the word. You can also give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, tell me, was there anything that I missed? Should I make another video on sewing room essentials? So let me know in the comments below. And of course, if you have not already, please do consider subscribing. And until I see you next time, I hope you have a creative day. Bye-bye.